best practices for communications tech use. Dr. Mitchell is the Aliber Distinguished Associate Professor and Chair of Information Management and Business Analytics at Drake University. She is an experienced teacher, researcher, and consultant in relation to the design, implementation, and use of information and communication technologies for collaboration, specifically in global virtual teams. Dr. Mitchell has worked with the U.S. Strategic Command Center, Principal Financial Group, General Mills, and a number of other Fortune 500 companies, educational institutions, and nonprofit organizations. Additionally, Dr. Mitchell serves as an expert for news media outlets, including Business Record, Forbes, and Washington Post, among others. Now, it is my pleasure to moderate this conversation, so let's get started. Welcome to the summit, Dr. Mitchell. We're so happy to have you here to discuss communication technologies for remote and
Thanks
hybrid
for having
teams.
me today.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Mitchell. So I read your introduction or your bio, but I'd love to ask you and pass the mic to you. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your personal or professional journey before we dive into questions today?
Yeah, I'm super happy to have this be a topic of conversation for today and tomorrow, because I do think, this is something that I'm really interested in. And over the past couple of years, I think it's really been highlighted for a lot of people. So I'm excited to have this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So what sort of things should leaders of remote and hybrid teams consider when evaluating which of the most common commercial products they should use for team communication? So I know we've got a lot of things on the market. Lots of people are asking the big questions here. So what do you recommend?
Yeah, I think that the first really important thing to consider is the task that you're trying to support. So like the purpose of using that technology. There's actually a theory called task technology fit. So every technology is not just going to solve your problem, right? You need to have something that actually fits what you're doing. If you're trying to have complicated conversations and decisions, then email is not going to be the choice, right? And if you're trying to, make quick decisions, then Zoom's also not necessary. So just making sure that you have, covered all your bases in terms of different technology capabilities to support different tasks that you have. I think that that's the first important thing. A second thing that I would say to emphasize is making sure that, everybody on the team or in that group or the overall organization has access to that technology and support in case something is not going right, or they have questions, so they feel like they can find answers and they can get there and they can find answers if they need that. Ease of use, I think, is also really important. You don't want your team members spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to use a new technology. So something that maybe they've seen before, or they have some familiarity with, or they're comfortable, just something that's easier to use, or kind of meets their expectations. And then the last thing I would say is accessibility. So Zoom is even really doing some really nice things with like the transcripts and the automatic saving of the video, or very easy saving of videos and transcripts after meetings. They've added the pronouns in now. So I think a lot of that is really important, just making sure whatever tool you're using does accommodate like colorblind individuals. So thinking about colors, thinking about screen readers, thinking about making sure accessibility is a part of that too. So those are kind of the 4 key things I would say when you're picking something.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for that high level coverage there. And clearly, with your background, I'm sure you've seen, new things coming to the market and just new tools. As you said, Zoom is, and I've had people for different conversations that I've facilitated and moderated here with Power to Fly specifically. Folks will shout me out in the chat and thank me. I'm like, this isn't me, this is Zoom. I'm just, clicking enable the live transcript, for example, but different things. And I hear people saying thank you. So clearly people are being heard, and it is definitely necessary to make this accessible. I also love that you're highlighting that, tech is not a one size fits all solution. And we need to make sure that we're being intentional about how we're using the tech according to what we're trying to, solve or resolve or to communicate. So thank you also for highlighting that.
Yeah, I think that that's an important comment that you just made, because every time I give a talk with PowerPoint, I have the transcript on. And so, if I have a mask or wherever I am, you can still read the words. And every time after I get done, people are like, how did you do that? It's just a PowerPoint add-on, no problem.
Yeah, that's great. It's like sharing. It's like I can receive the praise, but actually, you know what? I will say we can receive that praise because some people might not even press, enable live transcripts. So
Yes.
we have to, as human beings, we have to go to that extra step and make sure that we are using the tools at our availability there. So we have someone in the live chat that's asking, what was the name of the technology fit theory?
Oh, that task technology fit. That's it. So TTF.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to this next question here. What are some best practices that remote and hybrid teams should keep in mind regarding communication technologies?
Yeah, so I have a lot here. I would say one really good one is to communicate through multiple channels, right? So if you do have a message, making sure that you're using lots of different ways to get that message out, visually, audibly, written, all those different options, and repeating those keywords too, like repeating key messages that are coming up. I also really like the policy to emphasize remote first. So then it doesn't really matter where people are, they're kind of getting that message at the same place, as kind of a starting point. So I do like that as an important one, just making sure you're using multiple channels to reach everybody. Second one is kind of related to that task technology fit. Again, making sure that you have a purpose and you're sure about your purpose and you're using the right tool for that task. So Zoom fatigue is a real thing. You don't want to overuse it. And so thinking about that and just being intentional and making smart choices about what technologies you're using. Another one I would say is prioritizing wellness, kind of falls on that Zoom fatigue, right? In order for people to be really productive and to feel really productive, they want to get into a flow. That's another theory for everyone. So they want to get into flow where they have deep work. And so maybe having meeting-free days or meeting-free chunks of time so that people can be enabled to get into that deep work or flow, then I think that that's a helpful thing to do too. Using the technology for social tie development too, I think is also important. So not just being task oriented all the time, but giving people the chance to do fun things with the technology to kind of connect and build that trust and team commitment and motivation is an important thing too. So I would say, playing games or like having, ugly sweater day or something like that. So people or wear costumes to your meeting, those kinds of things, and using tools to do that too. Another thing I would say, if you're using collaboration technologies a lot, is to make sure that you have some kind of committed synchronous time that people can work together. When you have people in different locations and they're just using technology to work, everybody's working at different times and doing different things, and maybe their responsiveness is not, super fast or anything like that. So if you have kind of like a committed hour or something like that, where everybody kind of agrees, like, I will be highly responsive during this time period. So if there's a chat message and I can see those other people, I see their little green dots, like I know that they're working, I feel like I'm a part of something. I think that synchronous time is really important. And then the other thing I would say is when you are meeting over Zoom or any Microsoft Teams, whatever you're using, just making sure that you are planning for meeting productivity, and inclusivity, like you're thinking about time zones, you're thinking about the tools that you're using, but you're also thinking about like, these are the things that we're going to get done, that we want to get done. And we're not just using meetings to have people just like talk and communicate messages, because that's not really the point of a meeting. The point is to have some kind of communication and back and forth. And so thinking about that too, just making sure, you have an agenda, you have a purpose. You're not just meeting all the time with just one person talking. That's not really the point. So thinking about intentional meeting decisions. We spend a lot of time of our day in meetings, and we want to make sure that those are useful times of our day.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I love the highlight of intentionality there. So I actually want to unpack something that you said about inclusivity, and just tie it into, of course, we can get all of these tools and, programs and structures and things like that, but we are, at the end of the day, we're all human, right? So I love that you're highlighting, make sure that you're being inclusive, with regard to time zones and people's cultures and things like that. Is there anything that you would recommend, a way that people can check in, let's say the manager or the team lead, just to make sure that voices are being heard? Is there like a trial era period? I know that the learning curve is really big in these situations, and as more folks are moving into hybrid or remote work, what do you suggest there?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple different ways, and I think that that's an important thing for any leader or manager to be doing. Whether you're doing like one-on-one, weekly one-on-ones, where you're at really like asking, do you have everything you need? Is there anything that I can do to make this easier for you? Right? Any roadblocks, those kinds of things. So one-on-ones are helpful. Sometimes it's nice to just get like the pulse of the whole team or the whole group. So maybe a more anonymous survey where you can, more freely feel like you can say the things that you need that way. So those are both good options. And I think, whether you're doing like pulse surveys quarterly or something like that, but the one-on-ones, still making sure that you're having some human connection. Otherwise, what's the point of staying in that team, right? Like you'll just feel like, well, I'll just go to a different team. this one is not worried about me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And actually, that's a great segue into this next question, because you did mention the importance of wellness, and keeping the human at the center of this and having technology support us. We have to think about wellness and we have to talk about it. It can no longer be this taboo. And it's beautiful that, over time, a lot of interviews that I'm having with, thought leaders in the industry are highlighting, we don't want to feel burnout. We don't want to have this fatigue. We want to make sure that we are heard and being taken care of. So let's talk a little bit about employee wellness. Specifically, this question relates to Portugal. So Portugal recently made it illegal for employers to contact employees using communication technologies outside of office hours. Do you think this kind of regulation is useful in maintaining employee wellness?
Yeah, so this news actually came out, I think, this past November. So it's been a little while. And it actually says that employees should have 11 uninterrupted hours of night rest, right? So they should be allowed 11 hours where they're not having to be worried about work, which is great, right? I think from the leader perspective, there's a couple important points about this. I always advise leaders that whatever they're modeling is what their team or their whole organization is going to do, right? So if a manager feels comfortable giving out their personal contact information and taking calls at night, that's great for them. But then that also kind of shows like, well, now I expect the same of you, right? I would say in my own experiences, I have had leaders who have been contacting me in the middle of the night. I feel like, a lot of pressure to be able to respond right away. I've also had leaders who have set up more clear boundaries about when they expect work to be happening and when they don't. And I personally find that to be more preferable for me. But the leaders, whatever they model, that's what's going to be the culture of the team or the group that's working together. So I think that the leader perspective on that is really important. Sometimes there are, situations where maybe you have a startup company and it's moving really quickly and it makes sense for that to be the culture of the company where you're working constantly. But then you get to a point where you do want to have more boundaries. And so just being intentional about how you're doing that, I think is important as the team grows and moves forward. So I think the leader does set the tone.
And then again, just to reinforce what you were saying, that those constant check-ins, so making sure, that people end up wanting to work with you, to continue to work with you, that they're being heard, and, not just, having technology do the work. We still have work to do as humans. We are social beings. So I love that also in some of your previous responses, you were highlighting, to create some sort of fun, social gatherings using technology. And so it's not just, about heads down. Of course, we need to do that, but we also need to show our humanity in the work.
Yeah, we're all human for sure. That's a part of it too. We want to enjoy the people that we work with. And so I think that sometimes there can be a blurring of those boundaries, but it's important for us to determine what they should be for ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So I just want to call out our folks who are live in the chat. Continue to drop any questions or reflections. We've got a couple more minutes left, but we want to hear from you. So if anything comes to mind, we do want to hear from you. So drop those questions in the chat. All right. For now, let's move on to this next question here. How might the metaverse or other similar VR technologies be helpful or harmful when implemented in remote and hybrid teams?
Yeah, this is a great question. The topic of a metaverse is something that's been studied for a couple of decades. In fact, this is something that I personally have been studying for a really long time. So I do have a lot to say about it. I do think, a combination of a lot of things has really brought this more to to the forefront of everybody's mind. The fact that metaverse gaming is just becoming so popular. Facebook renaming themselves to be called Meta. NFTs now kind of getting a lot of attention. And the pandemic, all those things kind of coming together have just really brought metaverses more to the front of our mind than ever. There are some cool things that are possible for if we're kind of using the metaverse as a collaboration technology at work. There's some kind of cool things that can happen there. One great story I saw, Loom is a cool video tool that probably a lot of people have heard of. They used to do their kind of connections in person, right? And over the course of the pandemic, they couldn't. So they sent everybody on the team an Oculus headset, and then they decided that they would do a metaverse kind of team building exercise as their sort of in-person event for the year. And so that's a really cool story. They got together in the metaverse. It's the full body experience. You feel like you're still together with those people. And they worked on building a pirate ship together. And so they had that interaction where they were, doing something as a team and kind of like an in-person experience. And so like, that's a good example. We also see a lot of development, like Horizon Workrooms is kind of a cool one. So another like specifically work-oriented metaverse that's coming out. Another one that I've seen is called Branch. And so it basically has like a work office, and you can take your little avatar guy and go from your office to somebody else's office. You can bump into people in the hallway. So it's a very like office space kind of environment. The good things about those is that it does allow for that synchronous interaction that we might really yearn for in a face-to-face environment, but maybe we can't because of different locations or wherever we are, those kinds of things. So just like in terms of the question, like, are metaverses helpful or harmful? I think probably both, right? Like, I do think that there are some specific benefits to that environment, and the fact that you can be with people in a space at the same time and feel like you are there working on something in a full body, very intentional, like movement of your avatar. I do think that there's benefits to that. I do think that there's also concerns, right? Like, it's still not the same as all of us actually being together. Even in the Loom example I was talking about, they had some disruptive avatars that came over and started throwing things at their pirate ship, right? So it's not like a totally safe and secure and private environment in that case. But that ends up being kind of funny team building, right? Like, that now they just think about like how they were interrupted in their team building. So I think that there's good things, and I think that there's bad things. I do think in the next decade, this will definitely be a thing that grows more and more. And so we will really have to see how some of these things end up playing out.
So thank you so much for your response there. I would love to just go a little deeper, as you are not the only one who's super fascinated with this topic. It's interesting, of course, that you have lots more years of expertise in just researching and sharing this knowledge. But I'm curious to know, just so that we can all be proactive, what can we do now? Looking to 10 years ahead, what could possibly be happening? What can we start to do now? You can approach this from creating policies or building emotional intelligence, but what can we do right now to make sure that it's more helpful than harmful in the future?
Yeah, I think that those are both good questions. I mean, there's a lot. I mostly approach this from the research perspective, and there's a lot of studies going on too, right? Like in terms of avatar appearance, is that a thing that we are going to have to care about, right? Like, how are we going to manage that? Does it matter if it's a more realistic avatar or a less realistic avatar? I think, the ethics of what can happen in there is also a really big question that we're talking a lot about. I don't know that we have any of that figured out. And I don't know how we will move, like, just in terms of a research perspective, there's certain things that we can do and that we cannot do, that we are, legally required to not be able to put people in harm. And we just don't have those requirements in a virtual metaverse space, right? So thinking about what that will look like, I think that those are all important things. And I do think that we're working on them, but I just don't know that we have the answers right now.
Well, I like to be positive in my outlook. And I think that it's a really interesting moment. I always say, through all the chaos and craziness that's going on in the world, this is a great time to be alive because we can shape so much. And oftentimes I want to say, like, oh, I don't want to be involved. Like, it's people are just going to try to put profit over people, and then we're going to get ourselves into trouble. But I feel like, if we can recognize this very real thing that you just said, like, we don't have all the answers. So actually we can shape that future reality right now based on what we need, based on, belonging, inclusivity, equity, all the things that we're talking about now. So I definitely, this is a call to action from both of us here. We we have some opportunity.
I mean, you're totally right. And I was mostly focusing on the negatives there, but there are so many positives. There's a lot of research about neurodiverse individuals and the value of being in a metaverse, or people who are homebound, having the opportunity to have experiences that they wouldn't be able to have otherwise. So there are really cool things like travel opportunities in the metaverse, or like real immersive training experiences that anybody wouldn't be able to have otherwise. So there's a lot of really cool opportunities. And those are all exciting.
Great. All right. So yeah, don't lose hope, everyone. We're in a really interesting time in our history. So I encourage everyone to pick up different tools, and so that we can shape this together. All right. So we've just got a couple minutes left. I'm going to hit on one more question, and then if we have time, we'll move to the chat box here. So what are some lesser known communications products or products in development that you think could be useful for remote and hybrid teams?
Yeah, this is a good question too. Gartner has actually made a prediction that the collaboration technology market is going to grow to like $7 billion in 2024. So there's a lot of new development happening, a lot of really cool innovations that I think are fun to look at. And I don't even know if I'm going to say all of them right, but I'll give you a couple that I really like. And Zoom, I have loved Zoom for years, and so I'm so excited that it's taken off like it did because of the pandemic. But this is a good one for sure. Remo.co is another one that I really like. It's kind of like a conference networking tool. So you can take your person and you can go sit at a table and you actually see the other people that you're sitting with. So it's a really very realistic conference experience. There's a stage with a speaker, and you can move from table to table and kind of network and communicate like you would in person. I really like that one. Loom is another one. I mentioned that example earlier. Really nice video communication kind of messaging tool, easy, attractive, quick kind of walkthrough of my screen, let me kind of give a little tutorial, those kinds of things. So I like that one a lot too. Notion is pretty cool. It's like a collaborative documentation tool. So everybody can kind of work on it together. It's like a repository of information. You can have comments and people can kind of build on it. So that's a really nice one for just organizing thoughts for teams and producing documents from that. And then Mailman is another great one. That one actually batches your emails. You know how we get those dopamine hits for checking our email, and it's not great for flow and that deep work that I was talking about earlier. So Mailman is great. You can just schedule it for a couple times a day that you're going to get all your emails, and that will be your email time. And you don't have to worry all day about being interrupted by, not important emails. So those are a couple cool ones that I think. There's some other ones like Thread, Signal, some other cool ones worth checking out. But yeah, lots of cool stuff about to happen.
Yes, I love that. And if you all are using any or know of anything happening that you'd like to highlight, please drop those in the chat. As we said before, this is a really interesting time. Lots of things are happening. And as you mentioned, of course, the pandemic has been just, a whirlwind of everything, emotions and just, sadness and grief. But tools like Zoom, for example, have been able to come up and help, connect us through work and virtual events and things like that. So it's cool that you saw Zoom before, they were able to reach out to more folks during the pandemic. So I would love to hear from you all. If you have any recommendations, please drop those in the chat. All right, so we've got about 4 minutes left. I would love to use this time to just highlight some things that folks are writing in the chat here. So Vania writes, I think one of the biggest issues I've had is that technology gets in the way of radical candor, and the power distance feels so unsurmountable between me and the perceived superior. Even as a contractor and consultant, the constant check-ins spike my anxiety hardcore. Aside from therapy, what is a good way to watch that from a technical communications perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I think in this case, that leader is maybe just figuring out how to be productive in a virtual collaboration environment, right? A lot of management was not trained to work this way. And so the pandemic has really pushed managers to work in a way that they're not used to, right? Like the sort of traditional approach to management is behavioral, right? Like I see you working, therefore you're working. And that's not the way that we can do it anymore. We have to have another way of measuring employee productivity. So in this case, probably that manager is not, is not doing the best thing that they could be doing to make sure that their team members are successful. So, some of the ways that you can go about approaching that from an individual perspective is, trying to set your own goals and targets and letting them know, like, how are these goals and targets what you think you would expect? And so, like, making clear communication about what your plans are and making sure that that's in line with what they expect. And then you can have a little bit more of a conversation about, when we're going to be having check-ins and when we're not, and how I'm going to be meeting these deliverables without you having to just like see me working, right?
Yeah, this is a great time for, leaders to also just reshape, throw out the window what they thought leadership was.
Yes.
And sit at the table again, brainstorm with other leaders who want to practice inclusivity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, all these beautiful words that are coming up to our, the center of the way that we work, and build something new. So yes, leaders, take shape, help us take shape. I love that call out there. All right, so this has been such an enriching conversation. Dr. Mitchell, is there anything else you'd like to highlight, any food for thought? You've been working on so many beautiful things. I mean, just in your introduction, I'm like, wow, I would love to have several hours interviewing you. But can you just highlight, anything else you'd like for us to remember, take away, any food for thought here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the task technology fit is a big one, right? Like just recognizing that, using the same tool for every problem is not the best thing. That's why we get tired of these tools. That's a problem, right? So making sure that we're just intentional about selecting the tools that we're using. And then also the meeting thing, making sure that we are using our time together, our synchronous time together in the most effective way possible, and including like social connections as a part of that. And making sure we're reaching our goals and we're using everybody's brains and power that is there. So I think that those are both really important things, and I can never stress those enough.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Mitchell. It's been a pleasure to speak with you today. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.